Welcome to a chilling journey through history where we explore the terrifying moments when the world stood on the brink of nuclear annihilation. Now, I know what you're thinking, Michael. Nuclear war? That's a bit heavy, isn't it? And you'd be right, it absolutely is. But it's also a terrifyingly real possibility that we've danced around more times than a drunk uncle at a wedding. From Cold War tensions to modern-day saber-rattling, these stories will make you question how close we've come to the unthinkable. Buckle up, kids. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Picture it, 1962, the height of the Cold War. The world was a powder keg, and the fuse was lit. The Soviets, led by the stoic Khrushchev, decided to play a little game of whose nuclear button is bigger in our backyard. They started sneaking nuclear missiles into Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. Imagine the US discovering that Vladimir Putin was hiding nukes in Cancun. Yeah, that level of oh hell no. President Kennedy, facing down a potential apocalypse, established a naval blockade around Cuba. For 13 agonizing days, the world held its breath as Soviet ships steamed towards the blockade, carrying enough firepower to turn the planet into a radioactive wasteland. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a Soviet-issued butter knife, which, knowing their manufacturing, was probably duller than a sack of wet hair. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of two men who, frankly, probably shouldn't have been trusted with a toaster oven, let alone the nuclear codes. Behind closed doors, frantic negotiations took place. The US threatened full-scale retaliation if the Soviets crossed the line. The Soviets, bless their stubborn little hearts, refused to back down. It was a game of nuclear chicken, and no one was blinking, except maybe that one guy in the war room with a twitchy eye. You know the one, we all know that guy. Finally, after days that felt like centuries, a breakthrough. Khrushchev, in a moment of either sanity or exhaustion, agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba. In return, the US secretly agreed to remove their own missiles from Turkey. The crisis was averted, and humanity breathed a collective sigh of relief. The world had stared into the abyss, and somehow we managed to step back from the edge. But the close call served as a chilling reminder. The threat of nuclear war wasn't some abstract concept. It was a very real danger that could erupt at any moment. Fast forward to 1983. The Cold War was still simmering, and paranoia was the soup du jour. On September 26, the unthinkable almost happened. Deep inside a Soviet bunker, alarms blared, red lights flashed, and a very stressed-out officer by the name of Stanislav Petrov stared at a screen that told him the world was about to end. The Soviet early warning system, a technological marvel that was about as reliable as a Yugo in a snowstorm, had detected incoming US missiles, 5 of them to be precise. Now any sane person would assume the worst and start prepping for the inevitable mushroom cloud. But Petrov, bless his giant skeptical balls of steel, decided to use the one thing the Soviets seemed to be lacking at the time, common sense. He looked at the data, scratched his beard and thought, this seems fishy. 5 missiles? That's an oddly specific number for a first strike, wouldn't you say? It just didn't add up. Ignoring protocol, and probably his bladder, Petrov made a decision that would change the course of history. He picked up the phone, not to the Kremlin to unleash the dogs of war, but to his superiors, to tell them, in a voice that was probably shaking more than a chihuahua on a roller coaster, that he thought the system was malfunctioning. Now imagine being that superior. You're woken up at 3 a.m., probably hungover from too much Stoli and bad decisions, and some guy on the other end of the line is telling you that the world isn't actually ending. You'd probably call him an idiot and go back to sleep, right? Thankfully, someone somewhere had the good sense to listen to Petrov. The order to retaliate was never given, and the world was spared a nuclear holocaust, all thanks to one man's gut feeling and a healthy dose of skepticism. Petrov's story is a testament to the fact that sometimes all it takes to save the world is one person willing to say, hang on a minute, are we absolutely sure about this whole nuclear annihilation thing? Hold on to your hats, folks, because things are about to get really tense. Just 1 year after Stanislav Petrov saved us all from a very awkward Tuesday, the world decided to tempt fate once again. This time, the culprit was Able Archer 83, a NATO military exercise that was so realistic it nearly triggered a full-blown nuclear war. The exercise involved simulating a realistic scenario of escalating conflict with the Soviet Union, complete with coded messages, increased military activity, and even Margaret Thatcher, pretending to be really cross with the Kremlin. The problem was the Soviets, already on edge after a series of unfortunate events, like, almost blowing us all to kingdom come, mistook the exercise for the real deal. They saw NATO's simulated escalation as a genuine prelude to a nuclear attack, and their paranoia went into overdrive. Suddenly, Soviet forces across Eastern Europe were put on high alert, fingers hovering over the proverbial button, just waiting for the order to launch. Meanwhile, the good people of Western Europe, blissfully unaware that they were now living in a real-life Tom Clancy novel, went about their day completely oblivious to the fact that their morning commute could have easily ended with a blinding flash and a mushroom cloud. Thankfully, cooler heads, probably attached to people who weren't playing high-stakes war games, eventually prevailed. The Soviets, after some tense hours of double-checking their intel and realizing that maybe, just maybe, NATO wasn't actually insane enough to start a nuclear war over a game of pretend, stood down. Able Archer 83 was a stark reminder that in the realm of nuclear brinkmanship, miscommunication and paranoia are far more dangerous than any weapon. You'd think that after the whole almost ending the world thing in 1983, we would have learned our lesson, right? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because in 1979, we proved that not only were we capable of almost destroying ourselves, but we could do it with the help of technology that was about as sophisticated as a speak and spell. On November 9th, 1979, the good people at NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the folks tasked with making sure the sky doesn't rain down nuclear hellfire, experienced a slight hiccup. It seems someone, and we still don't know who, accidentally loaded a training tape simulating a full-scale Soviet nuclear attack into the operational computer system. Now, you'd think there would be, I don't know, a giant flashing sign that said, "Warning, this is a drill. Please don't launch all the nukes." But apparently that was asking for too much. So there they were, the fine folks at NORAD, staring at their screens, which were now lit up like a Christmas tree on crack, showing wave after wave of Soviet missiles heading straight for their morning coffee. Panic, as you can imagine, ensued. Phones were grabbed, buttons were mashed, and I'm fairly certain someone, somewhere, probably wet themselves. For 6 agonizing minutes, the world teetered on the brink, all because someone forgot to label their training tapes. Thankfully, before anyone could say, well, it was nice knowing you, someone, probably an intern with a caffeine addiction and a knack for spotting a misplaced decimal point, realized the error. The order to retaliate was rescinded, the training tape was ejected, hopefully with a stern talking to, and the world breathed a collective sigh of relief. It's 1995, the Cold War is over, the Berlin Wall is gone, and MC Hammer's career is sadly experiencing a similar fate. You'd think we could all relax, maybe enjoy a nice cup of herbal tea and contemplate the meaning of life, right? Wrong. Because in 1995, we proved that even when it comes to almost ending the world, we're creatures of habit. This time, it wasn't the Soviets who nearly pushed the button, but the good people of Norway. See, Norway, a country known for its fjords, Vikings, and surprisingly catchy pop music, decided to launch a scientific research rocket, a perfectly harmless rocket, mind you, designed to study the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, as we like to call them in the biz. The problem was, this particular rocket, with its impressive trajectory and unfortunate timing, looked suspiciously like a Trident missile launch to the ever-vigilant eyes of the Russian early warning system. Now the Russians, still a little jumpy after, decades of Cold War tension, weren't about to take any chances. Alarms blared, generals screamed, and Boris Yeltsin, probably still nursing a hangover from celebrating the fall of communism, was handed the nuclear briefcase. For a few tense minutes, the fate of the world rested on whether or not someone in the Russian High Command had bothered to check the international launch schedule that day. Thankfully, someone, somewhere, probably a low-level clerk with a penchant for astronomy and a fear of mushroom clouds, noticed the discrepancy. The order to retaliate was revoked, Yeltsin went back to his vodka, and the Norwegian scientists, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just given the entire world a collective heart attack, celebrated a successful rocket launch. The Norwegian rocket incident, as it came to be known, was a comedy of errors, a perfect storm of misinterpretation, technological hiccups, and good old-fashioned Cold War paranoia. It was a stark reminder that even in the supposedly safer post-Cold War world, the threat of nuclear annihilation was never more than a misunderstanding away. These near misses, these heart-stopping moments when the world stood on the precipice of nuclear oblivion, remind us of the fragile balance that keeps our world from descending into nuclear chaos. It's a balance maintained not by treaties or technology, but by the slimmest margin of human judgment, by individuals who, in the face of unimaginable pressure, chose diplomacy over destruction, skepticism over blind faith. As tensions rise in today's geopolitical climate, it's crucial to remember how close we've come, and how important it is to avoid repeating history. We must learn from these mistakes, from these moments of terrifying clarity, and strive for a future where the threat of nuclear annihilation is not a matter of if, but a distant memory of what could have been. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and let's hope cooler heads continue to prevail. Because the next time we find ourselves staring down the barrel of a nuclear crisis, we might not be so lucky.